Hey everybody, Will here from Downtime Activities, back again with another RPG review, this time for one that we've been featuring on the channel quite a bit, but obviously haven't talked about much outside of those videos. And if you're a fan of a, well, very popular and well-known film and video game and book franchise, you might be interested in this one because today we're going over the Star Wars tabletop RPG system from Fantasy Flight Games.
I'll go over both character creation and gameplay itself, as well as a few general impressions about the whole system before we hear from some of the players. Currently, the Star Wars tabletop RPG system is split into 3 core rulebooks: Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, and Force and Destiny. The rulebooks as they stand are set during the period of the Galactic Civil War, as the armies of the Empire march across countless worlds and hold them in an iron grip, while a brave rebel alliance fights back against them. The Jedi are all but gone, and heroes like Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia Organa, and Han Solo haven't yet risen into what they will become when the Empire begins to fall. Each of these 3 core rulebooks, while featuring different careers, specializations, species, and themes, are the exact same rule set, meaning everything from all 3 books is completely interchangeable. Edge of the Empire focuses on smugglers, bounty hunters, colonists, and people like technicians and pilots, all trying to make their way in the vast galaxy. It's a system designed to tell stories of morally gray characters, or at least characters with less than stellar views of legality. Of the 3 core books, it's probably my favorite style of setting. It's the Mos Eisley Cantina as an RPG campaign, and the equipment, careers, and ships all reflect this. The Age of Rebellion book is pretty self-explanatory. The careers here are all stuff like rebel soldiers or commandos, squadron pilots, spies and infiltrators, rebel mechanics, diplomats, or commanders. The point of these style of campaigns is to be sent on missions for the Rebel Alliance, actually participating in the war that is being fought throughout the original trilogy. One of our first forays into this system was as Grey Squadron, a specialized and unorthodox commando team doing exactly this type of work. Erickson, as the GM, interviewed us all in character to determine who would be team leader. It was me, by the way. I was Grey Leader, the brains and charisma of the party. The 3rd rulebook, Force and Destiny, is meant to more thoroughly explore the ideas of Force sensitives within the Age of the Empire, but this rule set would be perfect for setting a campaign during the height of the Republic, or with a group of characters during the Clone Wars. All of these books have rules for being a Force-sensitive character, but this rulebook is devoted to it. Each character is essentially a form of Jedi, and the balance between light and dark is constant. There are rules for the Imperial Inquisitorius, building and modifying lightsabers, using the Force, and seeking out places important to both the Jedi and the Sith. This book is rich in its possibilities, especially diving into its lore sections. On top of these, they've added dozens of expansions. Some are setting-specific, like an entire book about the Sons of Corellia, or an expansion just about Hutt-controlled space. Some add new rules and options for setting campaigns at specific points in the Star Wars timeline, like an entire expansion just about the rise of the Separatists and the beginning of the Clone Wars. Most of these expansions, however, are each devoted to a specific career, such as an entire expansion for the Bounty Hunter. It adds new specializations, equipment, ships, and has advice for the GM on running campaigns and adventures for those types of characters. Alright, let's get into how the system actually works. I'll start with character creation and then get into the actual mechanics of play, as well as trying to explain how the dice work, which is a little complicated. Like most other RPG systems, you have a line of ability scores, which are called characteristics. These are brawn, agility, intellect, cunning, willpower, and presence. Like D&D or Pathfinder, these are all associated with skills, which determine how naturally talented or suited you are at those various skills. Your starting characteristics are determined by the species you choose. For example, humans get a 2 in each category, while Wookiees instead have a 3 in brawn, but only a 1 in willpower. These are just starting levels, and at character creation you can adjust these slightly. Each species also gets some special abilities, like a free rank in a skill or some sort of passive ability. These vary wildly, and each of the core rulebooks has 8 species with only a little bit of crossover between them. On top of that, every single expansion adds more. Next, you choose your career. These are the classes and are split into things like Bounty Hunter, Hired Gun, Colonist, Smuggler, Ace, Soldier, Sentinel, Guardian, etc. These all sort of specialize in different things and give you a line of career skills which just mark skills from the list and makes them cheaper to upgrade because they're attached to your career. From your career, you choose a specialization, which is a subclass. These are meant to further focus your character into a specific skill set, as well as giving you access to unique abilities, buffs, and traits. Some specializations might be more support-focused, like a medic-style class, or others might be DPS-heavy, like the assassin. Whatever specialization you choose gives you another swath of career skills, and there might be some overlap here. You'll get free ranks and a handful of skills between your career and your specializations. Each species also has a number of starting XP. Some species start with a lot of XP, but might have fewer abilities or lower stats, while others will start with less, but might have a statistically stronger starting position. You spend XP to level up characteristics, which you can only do at character creation, rank up skills, or buy abilities out of the skill tree in your specialization, as well as buy new specializations entirely, which give you new career skills and access to a wider swath of abilities. You can buy these specializations from any career, or buy an extra specialization in your own career, which is kind of unique as far as subclasses go in a lot of systems. The Star Wars Tabletop RPG has no character levels. You just spend XP at any time between sessions to upgrade skills or buy new abilities. I like this a lot. I'm not a huge fan of XP systems in tabletop RPGs. I'd sort of just prefer that the GM has the narrative control over whenever the players level up. But I like that this system has no levels, and that you choose when to acquire a new skill or ability. It means the players never feel that much more powerful than they did when they started. Your equipment might have changed, and you will have more skills and abilities, some of which are very good. But too many RPGs have this weird feeling of starting essentially as a child and ending up a god. That works great for some stories and can be a lot of fun, but it doesn't work for every story. On top of all of this, you have a couple of other statistics, like wound threshold and strain threshold. Wound threshold is your pool of hit points, and it's just 10 plus brawn. I'll get back to this in the gameplay section because it has interesting implications. Strain threshold is a cool mechanic and is sort of like mental hit points. That's not exactly it, it's a little hard to explain, but it's a resource you can spend on certain abilities, as well as being the pool that's affected by the stun setting on blasters. Strain is 10 plus willpower, so some characters will have a deeper pool than others. Alright, I'm going to go over how the dice work before we go over combat. This system doesn't use regular dice. I mean, they're polyhedral and everything, and take the same basic forms from a d6, which you stack when bored, up to a d12, which only your barbarian gets to roll for damage because of the size of his axe. The thing is, they aren't your regular numbered dice. They have symbols instead, and while there are sheets out there that use regular dice and just interpret the results, it's better to just buy a set of the official ones or use a dice rolling app that has these type of dice, which is what we do. The reason the dice are so weird is because they don't just interpret success and failure. This is one of the hallmarks of the system, and one of the things we like best about it. There are two types of dice, positive dice and negative dice. The positive dice are determined by your skills or characteristics and represent things in your favor. High characteristics or high ranks and skills means you roll more dice, and upgrade the type of dice you roll. The negative dice are things working against you, such as the overall difficulty of the check or environmental effects that make it harder. An easy check is 1 purple d8, an average check is 2, and so on down the line. You might roll 4 dice total, 2 positive dice because of your characteristic, and another 2 negative dice because of the average difficulty of the check. There are 4 types of outcomes: successes, failures, advantages, and threats. There are also triumphs and despair, which are essentially critical hits and critical failures, but that's a bit of an oversimplification. I could probably make an entire video just about the dice, so I'm going to leave it there. Successes and failures determine whether or not you succeed at the action you're taking, like slicing a computer or shooting a blaster at a rival smuggler crew. Advantages and threats have nothing to do with whether or not you succeed, but how you succeed or fail, or other events that happen around the same time. Successes and failures cancel each other out, and advantages and threats cancel each other out, 1 for 1, and all that remain are your result. What this means in actual play is that not every check is a simple success or failure. These are possible, but the vast majority of times they will be modified by advantages or threats. You can succeed but with a threat, or fail but with an advantage. These can be spent in combat for specific boosts or setbacks, but in most roles, the GM and the player determine what the results mean. For example, you can succeed at a check but have some sort of setback, such as looking around the room to spot a contact you're supposed to meet, but also spotting a bounty hunter who you've traded blaster fire with in the past. Or you can fail but with an advantage, such as failing a check to hack into a computer but not setting off any alarms in the process. Obviously, you can succeed with advantages too, or fail with a threat, but those are pretty standard fare for dice rolls in an RPG. It just helps the GM determine the severity of success and failure, and the narrative implications. This means that there is a huge variety to checks, and it all contributes to the narrative structure of the game. That's part of what I like so much about the system. It manages to nail a narrative-driven gameplay experience. The problem is, this comes with the downside of the system being very complex, and it's not really a great choice for people trying to get into tabletop RPGs for the first time. That doesn't mean it's impossible by any means, and if this is something you want to try, by all means go for it. Just remember that it's a little less straightforward than a traditional succeed-fail dice roll system. The other thing I really like about this system is the combat. Combat is short and brutal, and getting hit with a blaster is a big deal. Most of the combats we've done, there have been less than 10 shots fired, many of them misses. One of my chief complaints with D&D and Pathfinder is how often fights end up feeling like two people standing next to each other, bopping each other on the head until one falls over. This system is not that way. Earlier I said that your wound threshold is usually 10 plus brawn. This means that even hardy characters tend only to have 14 or 15 hit points, and a regular blaster pistol does a minimum of essentially 7 damage, while a lot of blaster rifles do 10 or more. Your brawn also affects a thing called soak, and armor also affects this too, which is a flat number you take off the top of the damage in most cases. So if you get hit for 7 damage but have a soak of 3, you'll only take 4. This doesn't stop combat from being incredibly dangerous. You have to approach fights intelligently, use cover or strike from ambush, and quite often if you take wounds, you'll have those for some time. It's powerfully cinematic, which was part of the design philosophy of this system. Ship combat and ship stats, which is so intrinsic to Star Wars, work much the same way as characters, just on a larger scale. Ships have armor, which is their version of soak, and their own number of hit points, and system strain, which, like strain for characters, can be spent on unique abilities or maneuvers. They also have stats for speed, maneuverability, and the like, and on large ships, you can choose to reroute power to different zones of your deflector shields. These ships do a good job of making a group of characters feel like a crew, as your pilot, co-pilot, gunners, or mechanics are all making checks during combat or chases. There are dozens of ships in every core book and expansion, from the easily recognizable Corellian Engineering YT-1300 to little TIE fighters and X-Wings, or even capital ships like several different classes of Star Destroyer. In the campaign I was just running, Erickson just tracked down all of the speeder bikes across all of the core books and expansions and ended up with a huge list to choose from. Most of the ships are customizable and upgradable, and it's easy to end up with a ship that's as unique as your character, one which will probably rival the Falcon itself in performance and unreliability. One last thing that I want to go over is a rule that we don't usually use, at least not in its as-written form. Each of these 3 core rulebooks has a slightly different system that all amount to the same thing. In Edge of the Empire, it's obligation, in Age of Rebellion, it's called duty, and in Force and Destiny, it's morality. These are systems meant to, in large part, motivate the characters towards one course of action or another, and are governing forces hanging over the characters' heads. My problem with them is that they're largely too statistical. Someone new to tabletop RPGs who needs that mechanical and statistical structure to rely upon might get good use out of these, but I largely feel like it's putting artificial constraint on things that should be the unique areas of influence of the GM and the players themselves. With a good playgroup, these systems are largely unnecessary, and the effect they're trying to have will just be accomplished anyway through the course of organic RP and gameplay. It's not that these systems are bad, they're not how I like to run stuff like this. It adds a sort of mechanical video game constraint kind of feel to what should be a world limited only by RP and imagination, like locking off certain quests because the character's morality level isn't high enough or low enough to accept them. But hey, that's a personal take, and if you like how these systems work, keep using them and let me know. I'd love to get the take of someone who has more experience with them in actual play. Well, that's the basic of the system, but as per usual, everyone knows that GMs are just out to get you, so instead, let's hear from some of our players.
The Star Wars RPG system is a ton of fun. I've enjoyed all the games we've done of it so far, both running it and getting to play in it. The real shining star of the system, in my opinion, from both a game master and player perspective, is the dice rolling system and the levels of success and failure that come along with it. When you roll a dice and it's not just a I hit or I don't, or I succeed or I fail. It can be failure with an advantage or a success but with threat involved. It makes for a much more interesting and narrative action every time anything happens. Having those different varying levels is super cool.
All right. So the Star Wars RPG system is pretty interesting. It doesn't use like a numerical system of dice that you might be used to. It uses a special system of successes and fails and critical fails, and you kind of count up how many of those you get to determine your outcome, which is really interesting because you can absolutely pop off and just crit and have a bunch of good stuff, and then you get very interesting scenarios where you'll fail, but you'll have 3 advantages. So it's like you mess up, but something good happens, and that's very flavorful for the people playing because at least how we were playing it is the DM usually looks at you and says, all right, so what happens? And you get to kind of shoot yourself in the foot, but maybe don't take the whole foot off. The other parts of the campaign or parts of the system that are very interesting, it's just incredibly fast and brutal when it comes to combat. You can get into a combat and have it last 2 rounds. And it's like me hitting you, you hitting the floor. Like it can be over in an instant. And because of how some of the modifiers work, you can have some characters that are very interesting. They can like soak a bunch of blaster fire and chop a guy's head off with an axe. It's like, can't do that forever, but it's pretty terrifying when they do. So you get interesting scenarios throughout the game, and you have the very interesting possibility of failing and succeeding, or succeeding and failing, and all of the ups and downs that go with that. And it can be a very interesting and fun game to play.
I think what I liked about the Star Wars campaign, other than that, I've never played a sci-fi RPG before. It's all been more fantasy, which I actually enjoy the sci-fi a lot more. I would say that was one of the cool things. I think it was cooler to just have like guns or like, even though I was a melee character, I thought just the whole dice rolling system was interesting, seeing as how I needed a phone to do it instead of actual dice. I'm sure there's actual dice, but I think I just all around had a good time because it's just kind of that Star Wars world that I know I grew up with. Even though I grew up with the prequels, I still grew up with Star Wars, and so it's just kind of cool to be in that world. So.
Well, that has been our review of the Star Wars Tabletop RPG. I hope you guys give it a try. It took us a long time to even find out it existed, but it's really, really good, and it brings a lot to the table that other RPGs just don't do, especially in the variety of its dice rolls. If you guys are interested in this type of content, check out some of our other reviews or some of our gameplay in this system. The audio quality isn't great, and unfortunately they are audio only, but the characters are fantastic, and the story that we're telling is really a lot of fun. If you guys have any thoughts about the Star Wars RPG system, chuck them down in the comments below. We really like hearing from you guys, and you guys tend to have insights about the systems that we don't have, especially for those of you out there who have a lot more experience with the system than we do. If there are any other RPG rule systems that you guys would like us to take a crack at reviewing, let us know about those as well. We're always interested in trying new stuff. In the meantime, go forth, slay dragons, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities. That felt fine.
That was remarkably good.
That felt fine.
That was remarkable.
For just completely winging it.
For just winging it?
That felt pretty good.
I didn't. There was no Shatner. There was no stutter. There was no.
It's a Star Wars RPG.
There's something in the book. It's rules.
There's something on the wing. It's a Minoc.
No, it's not. It's not a Minoc. It's a planted charge, and the gang's about to blow it. You Imperial scumbags.
Oh, it's really sad that nobody watched that episode. That was a
really good. It's one of those things. It's like some of them get so many more reviews than the others randomly, and that's just one of the low ones. And I'm like, oh, that's the one that people should watch.
That was a decent one. I looked cool in that one. Why isn't anybody watching it?
I'm only watching the ones where we royally F up everything.
Well,
That's most of them.
They are pretty. Well, that's true. They are pretty entertaining.